Our scripture reading this morning is Hebrews 11, verses 8 to 10. And because I am unable to read it, I've asked Ben to help us, to read for us. So he's going to read Hebrews 11, 8 to 10 for us.
By faith, Abraham, when he was called to go out into a place which should after receive for an inheritance, obeyed. And he went out, not knowing whither he went. By faith he sojourned in the land of promise, as in a strange country, dwelling in tabernacles with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise. For he looked for a city which hath foundations, whose builder and maker is God.
Amen. Thank you, Ben. We look for that same city today, don't we? Whose builder and maker is God. Our guest speaker today is Elder Robert Pierson. I believe he's a member of the Grants Pass Church, is that correct? And he's here to bring us our sermon today. He has a wide experience in missionary work. In fact, you were a missionary in Jamaica, where I come from. So you have a lot of experience in my hometown. Welcome, Elder Pierson. Thank you.
When I was in Jamaica, I was in grade school, and I remember the island, a very beautiful island with quite a few nice beaches that one can swim in. Sometime maybe we can talk some patois. We'll see sometime. If I were to ask a show of hands, how many of you here were alive in 1950? Well, I'm not going to do that because I know some folks don't like to reveal their age. But I'm mentioning 1950 because I want to talk about a man who was born in 1950. And his wife was born in 1940. She was 10 years younger than he was. Hear me out. According to the SDA Bible commentary, Abraham, the patriarch Abraham, was born in 1950 BC, and his wife was 10 years younger. She was born in 1940 BC. When they were 70 and 60 years old, respectively, God called them to pack up and to leave their home in Ur of the Chaldees and go to a distant land. You all know the story, I'm sure. In about 1880 BC, they loaded up their camels and headed north out of town. The first leg of their journey was a 750-mile run up the Euphrates River Valley to the city of Haran. It was an easy climb from about 25 feet above sea level to a little over 1,000 feet. At least today, the ruins are 1,180 feet above sea level. Now, as you probably know, the Bible doesn't specify the means of travel. The Bible doesn't tell us that they went or rode on camels. But back then, that was the main means of long-distance travel. And on several occasions during his lifetime, the Bible mentions Abraham's camels. And we could go into that. I don't know how many of you have ridden on a camel. It's a different experience. If you're prone to be carsick or seasick, I wouldn't recommend a camel. They sway back and forth, and they're kind of an ornery beast if you've ever been around them. A camel can travel probably about 25 miles in a day, which is not too much of a push for a camel, even if it's loaded. At that rate, it would have taken Abraham and Sarah about a month to make that trip north to Haran. This morning, I'd like to take a brief look at the life of the patriarch Abraham. He was one of the great men of faith in ancient times, as I'm sure you all know. And today he is recognized and honored around the world by Christians, by Jews, and by Muslims. The Apostle Paul says in Hebrews 11:8, "By faith Abraham, when he was called to go out into a place which he should after receive for an inheritance, obeyed. And he went out not knowing whither he went." After that long journey to Haran, as I think of it, Abraham and Sarah were probably very glad to find a place where they could settle for a while. Back then, Haran was a city in a region known as Paran-Edom. That name Paran-Edom probably referred to the northern part of Mesopotamia. And today the ruins of Haran are located in south-central Turkey. Maybe some of you have been there and visited the ruins. We don't know much about Abraham's activities there in Padan Aram, but the Lord's messenger tells us in the book Patriarchs and Prophets that both Abraham and Sarah were active missionaries and led others to worship the true God, and that some of those converts even followed them to the promised land. Abraham's father, Terah, unfortunately passed to his rest while they were there in Haran. Unfortunately, we're not told about Mrs. Terah, if I can use that expression. Maybe she was there and stayed on after Abraham and his group left, stayed with the son Nahor, who was quite a bit older than Abraham. Abraham's oldest brother was 60 years older than he was. And when he died in Ur, they all left shortly after that. When you think of the ages, remember that it wasn't that many generations back to the time of Noah. From Abraham back to Noah was about 10 generations, if I'm remembering correctly. After some 5 years there in Padan Aram, Abraham and Sarah and his nephew and his wife, plus some others, packed up and left for the land of Canaan. But Abraham's brother, as I mentioned, stayed behind there in Haran, and he and his family. The trip to Canaan must have been a very interesting one for Abraham and his family. The distance was about 600 miles. It doesn't tell us what route he took, so of course that is quite variable. But if you travel between Haran and Jerusalem or central Palestine, the caravan must have gone through some very beautiful country. You go out of Haran to the west, you cross still some desert country, but then you begin to climb. And they went westward and then turned south, passing through some of the very beautiful mountains that make up Syria and Lebanon today. It was an interesting run. This would have been the first time that Abraham would have seen mountains. There's nothing like that in southern Iraq anyway. That area is flat and desert. After arriving in Palestine, the record says that they stopped briefly near the city of Shechem. Here they encountered a type of heathenism that I'm sure saddened them deeply. Human sacrifices on Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal, right north and south of the city of Shechem. They were offering children to be offered on red-hot burnt metal images, burned alive. While they were there, things changed weather-wise also, and a fairly serious drought set in. Abraham must have been looking for food for his family, for his group, as well as the many animals that they had. And so you know the story. We find Abraham going to nearby Egypt, hunting for food. We found plenty of food there, but he soon ran into another problem. Fearing for his own life, he said that Sarah was his sister. You know the story. And promptly, she was hurried off to the palace of the Pharaoh to become another wife in his harem. Fortunately, God intervened, sending plagues on the Pharaoh. God has sent plagues in Egypt more than once, as you all know. But Sarah was back home fairly soon, and the whole company was being hurried out of Egypt, courtesy of the Pharaoh. Upon returning to Canaan, they settled briefly near the little town of Bethel. We were talking about it in Sabbath school class this morning. It's in the high country, and in a place near the town of Bethel today, you can look out one way to the west and you can see the Mediterranean. You look out to the east and you can see the Dead Sea. It's only a few miles north of Jerusalem. They hadn't been there long when Abraham's servants and Lot's servants began to quarrel over grazing rights. Apparently, the grass was not growing as well as they liked. Lot cast his eyes to the great and the beautiful valley to the east, the valley of Siddim. Lot, of course, could have given the choice to his uncle, but it didn't happen, as you know. And soon Lot and his entourage were heading down into the beautiful valley of the Jordan River. And Abraham was left with the highlands. It was then that God promised him the whole land. God told him to look northward, southward, eastward, and westward. I will give it to you and to your descendants, God said. Then Abraham moved his camp south to the area around Hebron. It's an area that even today has good fertile soils. It's up about 3,000 feet above sea level, and it has a very attractive climate. If I were to try to compare it with something, I would say it's very much like being inland from San Diego up 3,000 feet. And he had many years under the oaks of Mamre, as you know. One day, word arrived that Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, had invaded Palestine, taking much of the north country. Then he had gone down into the Jordan Valley, subduing the cities in the valley, and even taking Lot and his family prisoner. Apparently, a runner came and told Abraham about the sad news, and immediately he organized a group of 318 men, rounded up some of the allies, his friends nearby, around him, and set out to confront the king of Elam. We don't need to go into all of the details of the war, but it wasn't long until he rescued Lot, his family, and some of the others, and apparently a lot of the loot, whatever had been taken. He returned to the Jerusalem area, and someone by the name of Melchizedek, the king of Salem, the priest of the Most High God, welcomed him back and gave him bread and wine and blessed him. We always wonder who this king of Salem was. The Bible doesn't tell us. In Jewish writings, that is, in the Jewish Talmud, it speaks of this person being the son of Shem. We don't know. But anyway, life for Abraham and Sarah continued under the beautiful oaks of Mamre after he got back from the battle. And it was during this period of time that one of the most important events in Abraham's life took place. God approached Abraham and made a covenant with him. You remember that Abraham sacrificed a 3-year-old heifer, a 3-year-old she-goat, and a 3-year-old ram, plus a turtle dove and a young pigeon. Abraham guarded the sacrifices there all afternoon, the Bible tells us, to keep any vultures or birds of prey from bothering, molesting them. After the sun set, Abraham fell into a deep sleep. God revealed to him that he would not inherit the land of Canaan immediately, but that his descendants would be the ones to inherit it, and that they would not inherit it until after 400 years had gone by, and that some of his descendants would be in slavery to the Egyptians. He went on and revealed to Abraham that bit of information, and then Abraham woke up in the night. He saw a blazing torch and a burning lamp pass among the several parts of the sacrifices that he had made. It would have been that probably God was giving Abraham the encouragement, the evidence that he would be with him, that his descendants would come back later in time. It was an assurance that he would also have a son, because they had been waiting, they had been promised that a son would arrive, and also that they would inherit the land of Canaan. This must have been quite an encouragement to Abraham. But as time went on, their faith began to wane. We're going through quite a few years here. Sarah was 76 years old when Abraham was 86. And as you know, she began to think that they would never have a son, and she went to Abraham, encouraged him to marry Hagar. I won't spend long on that story, you're acquainted with it. Sadly, he acquiesced, and it wasn't long until friction developed between the two women. Soon Hagar was on the road heading back to her native land, Egypt. God sent an angel to intercept her, and Hagar returned and gave Abraham a son by the name of Ishmael. And we know that Abraham grew fond of this son, Ishmael. Years went by. Abraham had reached the age of 99, and Sarah was 89. One hot summer day at about noon, Abraham was sitting in the door of his tent when he noticed 3 visitors walking by. Quickly, he jumped up and ran to greet them, inviting them into his tent to come and rest a while. The visitors accepted, and Abraham put on quite a spread for them. It tells us in Genesis chapter 18 that the visitors had their feet washed and they ate a meal out under a tree. No doubt it was an oak tree, as that's what is described as being in the area. But Abraham and Sarah were very hospitable people. Almost 2,000 years later, this very event was referred to by the Apostle Paul in Hebrews chapter 13, verse 2. Be not forgetful to entertain strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unaware. By now, it had become obvious to Abraham that his guests were no ordinary passers-by. Note what one of them said to Abraham in Genesis 18, verse 10. And I'll be reading in the New Living Translation. 9 months from now, Sarah will have a baby. And as you all know, Sarah was somewhere in the tent and heard the comment. And she laughed quietly. Let me read you what one of the visitors said in response to her laughter. Then the Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh? Why did she say, 'Can an old woman like me have a baby?' Is anything too hard for the Lord?" About a year from now, just as I told you, I will return and Sarah will have a son. Sarah was afraid, so she denied that she had laughed. But the visitor said, "Yes, you did. You did laugh." Well, after that, the three visitors arose and went on their way. Abraham accompanied them at least part of the way. Their journey was, as you know, one of justice. It was a sad one. When they informed Abraham that the cities down on the Vale of Siddim were going to be destroyed, you know what Abraham's response was. He pled with them for the righteous people that might live down there. At any rate, I won't take time to go into all of that. Perhaps Abraham saw the Holocaust, or at least part of it. We're not told. But another important thing that occurred during Abraham's 99th year was the institution of circumcision, and he complied. But the following year, about 1850 BC, when Sarah was 90 years old, she gave birth to Isaac. And of course, the proud father was 100 years old at the time. It was a great day for the family. They had waited many years for the arrival of that promised son. According to the Bible Knowledge Commentary, Isaac was weaned when he was between 2 and 3 years old. And Abraham threw a great feast celebrating the event. During the festivities, Sarah noticed that Ishmael, who was a teenager, maybe 16, 17 by then, that he was mocking Isaac. And, of course, Sarah was not happy. She went to Abraham and told him they must go. And Abraham may have hesitated a little bit, but God told him also that they needed to go, and they needed to go permanently. In Galatians chapter 4:29, Paul describes Ishmael's mocking as persecution. And God approved of Hagar and Ishmael's departure. Abraham gave them food and told them to leave. The pair headed south to Beersheba, which is on the edge of the desert. And miraculously, as you know, They were saved from dehydration, from death, by an angel of God. Ishmael became the father of 12 princes, and he left his mark on the desert south of Palestine. When Abraham was about 115 years of age, God told him to take his son Isaac, to a mountaintop in the land of Moriah, and there offer him as a burnt offering to the Lord. Abraham had completed many, many difficult tasks, but he hadn't ever faced anything like this. Nevertheless, he got up early that morning, took Isaac, a couple of servants, plus some wood, and headed north on his trusted donkeys. He left without saying a word to you-know-who, to Sarah. It was a painful journey for Abraham. The night before their arrival, Abraham spent the night in prayer, hoping that God would call off the ordeal somehow. You can read about that in Patriarchs and Prophets, page 151. On the third day out, they could see their destination looming in the horizon, with a cloud of glory hovering over it. This was the sign given to Abraham to identify the place of the sacrifice. Abraham told the servants to remain behind with the animals. Then he and Isaac went ahead, climbing the designated mountain, Mount Moriah. Isaac was carrying the wood, and Abraham the fire and the knife. Before long, Isaac noticed there was no lamb. You know what he said. "Father, we have the wood and the fire, but where's the lamb?" With an aching heart, I can imagine the father replied, "God will provide, my son." Once at the top of the mount, the trembling father revealed to his son the request that God had made of him. It was with terror and amazement that Isaac learned his fate. And that's a quote from Patriarchs and Prophets. But he offered no resistance. The strong young lad could have escaped if inclined to do so. Both father and son were undergoing a terrible experience. The Lord's messenger tells us that Isaac tenderly sought to lighten his father's grief and encouraged him in tying the rope that confined him to the altar. It's an amazing scene on the part of both father and son. After the last words of love had been spoken, the last tears shed, Abraham lifts that terrible knife in obedience to the command given him, when suddenly his uplifted arm is stayed, and he hears a voice from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham, do not lay a hand on the boy. Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. Almost 2,000 years later, the Apostle Paul pens those well-known words found in Hebrews 11, 17, and 19. By faith, Abraham offered Isaac as a sacrifice when God was testing him, and he assumed that if Isaac died, God was able to bring him back to life again. For Abraham and Isaac, that trip back home must have been a joyful one. Some 22 years passed after the great test on Mount Moriah. They were still living under the oaks of Mamre when Sarah, his wife of 87 years, passed to her rest. She was 127 years old. Abraham mourned her loss, but he had no land of his own where he could bury her. So he went to his Hittite neighbors and purchased a piece of land. On this land was the cave of Machpelah. Some of you may have been there and visited it. And that's where he buried Sarah. This was the very first piece of land in all of Palestine Abraham could call his own. Abraham lived another 38 years, and several important events in his life still remained to take place. About 3 years passed when Abraham was somewhere around 140 years old. He decided it was time to find a wife for his son Isaac. Isaac was 40 years old. Abraham didn't want him to marry one of the local Hittite women, so he sent his trusted steward, Eliezer, to Mesopotamia to find a wife for Isaac. Eliezer rounded up 10 camels and headed out for the city of Nahor in Mesopotamia. He prayed for God's help and guidance, and upon arrival, he went to the well outside the city where the young women normally came to fetch water, usually in the evening time. His prayer was that a young woman would both give him a drink and draw water for his 10 camels. Well, I don't know if you've ever watched a camel drink, but the young lady, Rebecca, must have been an unusual person to water 10 camels. You know the story. Rebecca did both the things requested, and they were soon on the caravan of the 10 camels, loaded down, I'm sure, with some goods, and headed back to the land of Canaan. And before long, Isaac and Rebekah were married. We're not told when Abraham decided to remarry, but sometime after Isaac's marriage to Rebekah, he married Keturah. She gave him 6 sons. In time, he gave them gifts and sent them off into the east, into the desert. Only Isaac received the full birthright endowment. His sons by Keturah, along with Ishmael, became progenitors of the people, at least part of the people of Arabia. During his lifetime, Abraham had 8 sons by 3 different women, and he got to see 2 grandsons reach the age of 15, Jacob and Esau. Abraham had a good life and with many rich experiences. Finally, when Isaac was 75 years old, Abraham turned 175 and quietly passed to his rest. As we think of the life of Abraham, that great man of God, we can't help but admire the way he listened to the voice from heaven and went on that long 100-year journey to the promised land. He had his moments of weakness. He made mistakes, but his obedience, his valor, his kindness, and his strong faith are an example and an encouragement to us today. Each one of us here this morning, we're also on a journey. We have our ups and downs, our challenges, and our joys. We're involved in the same great conflict that confronted Abraham back in his day. And we have the same God at our sides to help us today. One that helps and takes us through the rough spots that we may encounter in life, as well as the times of joy. When we think of our God, we can't help but see that he is a good God, a God who hears our prayers, a God who walks by our sides, and that everyone here is ready to meet our Lord on that day in the clouds of heaven is my prayer for each one of you here today.